This is Rogers TV.
Good evening. Welcome to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour. As we head into the second year of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen an increase in remote working, in loneliness and depression. Many of us have never felt so disconnected, and yet laughter remains an accessible part of our toolkit. It can create feelings of closeness and camaraderie at a time where this is especially valuable since we're not allowed to be physically close to one another. When we laugh with each other, whether it's through a Zoom call or sitting 2 meters apart at a coffee shop, our bodies become flooded with endorphins. It strengthens our emotional bonds with each other while also making us more resilient, creative, resourceful, and positive about what lies ahead. Finding ways to laugh through hardship reminds us that we're in control of whatever darkness may be facing us. Chances are the funniest people you know have all been through heartbreaking grief and suffering, and yet somehow they've been able to muster the ability to laugh at the absurdity of human life and to find relief even in the face of unthinkable loss. Now, you may think that you're not naturally funny, but the truth is, anyone can be funny, and there are very few circumstances in which humor cannot be found. Humor is a skill that anyone can learn, and to help you find humor in even the most difficult circumstances is a very special panel of guests tonight. First, I'm delighted to introduce Andrew Tarvin. Andrew, who goes by Drew, is the CEO of Humour That Works. It's a leadership development company that teaches professionals how to use humor to get better business results. Drew has partnered with top organizations around the world, including IBM, the United Nations, and the FBI, to solve problems with humor, human challenges with humor. His TED Talk on the skill of humor has been viewed online more than 9 million times, and only half of that, he assures us, has been by his mom. Welcome to the show, Drew. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm delighted to be here, and you're exactly spot on of like how valuable and important humor is in these, unprecedented times, which we know are unprecedented times because of the unprecedented number of times we've called them unprecedented times.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm tired of the expression myself, but I can't wait to do a deep dive into that later in the show. But I want to welcome our next guest, Ron Blake. Sometimes when our light goes on, it can flame back up again through an encounter with another human being. And for Ron Blake, that human being was late-night talk show host Stephen Colbert. One night in 2011, when Blake was sleeping, 3 men came into his loft, held him down, and sexually assaulted him. Later, while contemplating suicide with a bottle of pills at his side, he was watching Late Night with Stephen Colbert, and shockingly, he found himself laughing. That unexpected laughter is what launched a 6-year cross-continental journey of sharing his story. That journey has involved meeting over 32,000 strangers who have written their stories of triumph in 94 languages on almost 500 foam poster boards. Blake is a TEDx speaker whose ultimate goal is, you guessed it, to become a guest on the Late Night Show with Stephen Colbert. Thank you so much for joining us, Blake.
Well, thanks for having me, Barbara. And I was telling some of my friends and family, I'm really glad you're giving me this chance to do this, because a lot of times I've done interviews over the last 5 or 6 years, and a lot of people just focus on the really serious aspects of what I've been through. And I think we should. There's a place for that. But I also want people to be able to see there's also a place to look beyond the trauma. And there's a lot of comedy. There's been a lot of funny. Hopefully I can share some of the funny moments that have happened on this journey to to get on the Late Show with Stephen Colbert. So I'm really glad you're giving me this chance to let people see that side of it.
Well, the pleasure is mutual, and thank you so much for your courage and for sharing your journey with us. Before we get into what that journey has looked like for you, I want to mention a third guest who will be joining us later tonight, and that's Steve Sultanoff. Steve is a psychologist, professor, a speaker, and an internationally recognized expert on therapeutic humor. He is the past president of the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor, and he's written many articles on the subject over his more than 30 years in the field. Steve appears on the online show What's Your Ailment, and he's also appeared on the morning show Lifetime and PBS, among many others, so he'll be joining us a little bit later tonight. So I'd like to start off the show by asking each one of you, how have you used humor to get what you want, whether it's a client outcome or forgiveness or permission or calling in a favor? How have you used the skill of humor to get to where you want to go? Let's start with you, Drew.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think, I've used humor in a lot of different ways, and that's the engineer side of me. So kind of by short background, what you see up there on the wall is a degree from The Ohio State University in computer science. That's the whole reason it's there, is just for me to be able to point to that. But I use humor as a way to be more effective with people. Because I remember being in this meeting at Procter & Gamble, where I started my career before. And this meeting was one where it was incredibly boring meeting. And Barbara, I don't know if you've been in one of those meetings before where it's like so boring you almost want to cry.
One of those meetings that could have been an email?
Yes, exactly. It's one of the meetings that whole time you're like, this should have been an email, maybe a WhatsApp message. And you just start brainstorming all the other things you wish you could be doing instead of being in that meeting. You're like, man, I wish I could fold laundry now, which is something that we can actually do in the pandemic. Or you're like, maybe I should schedule a root canal just so I feel something.
Been there, done
and
that.
The problem with, you've been there, right? We've all been there. The problem for me in this particular meeting was that I was the one leading the meeting. And I had this realization where it's like, wow, if I'm bored while talking, the audience has to be bored while listening. And I had a bit of this existential crisis where I was like, oh no, is this the rest of my career? Do I spend the rest of my career going from boring meeting to countless emails back to boring meetings? And so I was talking with a friend about it, and he was like, why don't you just solve the problem of boredom? He's like, you love solving problems, which is true. Like, I'm an engineer. I do Sudoku and Kin for fun. I don't think of them as math problems, but math opportunities. I love solving problems. And so I was like, can I solve this problem of boredom? And so I started to bring in more humor into my work, some stuff that I had learned through improv and stand-up. And what I found was that as I incorporated more humor, adding jokes to my emails or teaching improv exercises to my team members, I got better results. It led to people actually showing up to my meeting. I had more fun in my meetings, so did they. It led to people actually reading and responding to my emails. It led to better results in the workplace. And that kind of got me on this journey to say, okay, how can I be more intentional about using humor in my everyday life for both professional and personal reasons?
And the funny thing about it, Drew, and I use this term ironically, is that when you went back to your high school reunion, your former classmates said, but you were never funny when we were in school together.
That is absolutely correct. And part of it's the degree thing. So if you know your personality assessments, I am a type A blue square conscientious INTJ with the sign of Aquarius. And that basically means that I am a stubborn, ambitious introvert who likes long walks on the beach by myself. But what I realized is that we are not our personality assessments. I very much had to learn this skill of humor. As you mentioned, my high school classmates did not think I was a funny person. People are still sometimes surprised by it. But humor is a skill, which means it can be learned. And that's what we do. And that's what my focus is on, is how do we teach people that skill of humor so that they can be more confident in their work, so that they can get better sales results, so that they can overcome some of the challenges and stress that they're dealing with day to day. And, it's not something that we're born able to do. It's not encoded into our DNA of whether or not we can tell a joke. It is something that we can learn. And what we say is we believe anyone can learn to be funnier. You're not going to watch one program and immediately have a Netflix comedy special waiting for you, but we can teach you some of the principles of what it means to use humor effectively.
Drew, I would love to hear more about some of the exercises that you take your clients through, but I want to go back to Blake. And Blake, you, in our conversations earlier, you painted a very visceral picture of how comedy quite literally saved your life. But I'm interested in hearing about the little moments along the way, certainly in the last 6 years, of how humor, comedy, and laughter have played a role in kind of forcing you to keep going and pushing ahead. I'm sure you have many funny stories to tell.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, when you meet over 32,000 strangers and they start opening up to you, people are going to tell you everything, and they have. And I feel like when, vulnerability begets vulnerability. And so that's what started happening. I know Drew was saying that, it's a skill that you can learn to be funny, but anybody, I feel like, can be funny at any given moment. And so that's what I had to start realizing, is that it's always there with you, but at times I feel like we almost want to be given permission to be funny, and we feel like we can't be creative, but we truly can. And so I started finding that side on this journey. I thought, I could either focus on all the bad things that have happened to me, or I could start focusing on these incredible funny moments and these entertaining moments. And a lot of people have given me. I mean, I feel like Trevor Noah or Samantha Bee would love to be me, because these people that I meet, these strangers, they're giving me all the material I need to share these funny stories. So it's right there in front of us all. I think we just have to give ourselves permission to grab it, to use it, and it can help us in our daily lives. It's just, and I love that Star Wars quote that says, "Your focus determines your reality." I think it was Qui-Gon said it to a young Anakin in one of the Star Wars. But again, if you're always focused on the negative or the sad, that's where your reality is going to be every day. So I had to tell myself, hey, you've got a lot of these great, funny, entertaining moments. Embrace them. And I may not be Robin Williams or Samantha Bee or or John Oliver, but it's making me laugh, and I'm embracing that laughter and that humor and that comedy much more in my life now on this journey.
And I think the key is here that not everyone has to be Samantha Bee or Trevor Noah. Like Drew put it, we don't have to necessarily be funny or sort of have our own late night Netflix special, but we can be funnier. But we're just newly joined by Stephen Saltinoff. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I wanted to ask you to take us through the science of laughter and humor. We know that it can do many great things for us, even though laughter, comedy, and humor can't erase the trauma or solve the problems, but it does many wonderful things for our bodies, physically, physiologically, mentally, emotionally. Talk us through some of those great benefits, and I guess why you've decided to apply humor to your therapeutic practice.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm very happy to be here and be able to share the therapeutic value of humor. When we look at humor, humor is a stimulus. So you experience something funny, perhaps it's a joke or a sitcom or a moment that has a humorous element. That humor then creates a reaction in all of us. And one of those reactions, the one that we most know, would be laughter. And we know that laughter is the physical response to humor. When we laugh, our muscles contract, our blood races through our body more quickly. The systems of the body are activated with the physical act of laughter. But humor also triggers what I call mirth. And mirth is the emotional element of humor. That is, when you experience humor, you may experience an uplift, a joy, the pleasure, and that's the emotional experience of mirth. The third area that humor triggers is what I label wit. And for me, wit is the cognitive reaction to humor. It's when you hear the humor and you appreciate it. A good example of that would be Peanuts cartoons. Often with a Peanuts cartoon, you don't guffaw, you don't laugh out loud, although you might, but most people don't, but they get it, and it puts the world in perspective. So what happens is that humor triggers laughter, mirth, and wit. And all three of those have physiological benefits, but all three also have psychological benefits. And distressing emotions, such as being anxious, depressed, or anger, cannot occupy the same psychological space as mirth. When you're feeling mirthful, you can't feel anxious. And then when you get the wit, it shifts that emotional experience as well. So bottom line, when you experience humor, you have these three potential effects that are beneficial physically and emotionally.
That's wonderful to hear, and you're a bit of a prankster. I want to hear more about some of the things you do both within and outside your practice to bring joy to others. But first, we're just going to cut to commercial break. We'll be right back after this. Don't go away.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
When you're online, Rogers TV on YouTube shares news and events from your community. Like messages from local leaders, updates on the latest health news, local business presenting their new offerings, and how our local communities are working their way through these unprecedented times. Visit and subscribe to Rogers TV on YouTube for the latest local information.
Do you have something to share? Let everyone know about your next meeting, your need for volunteers, or your fundraising event on the Rogers TV Community Billboard. Send us your words and we'll bring them to life on Rogers TV and rogerstv.com. When it's time to spread the word, go to rogerstv.com to add your announcement to the Community Billboard.
She come from, she's dressed in black and white. She told me everything is gonna be alright.
Every year, dozens of Canadians are killed or seriously injured because they take risks around railway tracks. Talk to your loved ones about rail safety. Visit stoptracktragedies.ca.
Welcome back to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour. As long as the human spirit survives, we will always be looking for light in the darkness and for comedy in the most unthinkable of tragedies. The good news is that humor and being funny are skills that anyone can master. And joining us tonight on the show are very special guests, Ron Blake, Drew Tarvin, and Stephen Sultanoff. Stephen, we were chatting a little bit before we went to break about some of the things that you do both within and outside your practice to bring joy to people's lives. And you've actually sent us some images, which we're just going to pull up on the screen now, showing some of the funny gadgets that you incorporate. You've got a clown nose there and some mental floss, it seems, a fake ID. Tell us about some of the things that you do to put a smile on people's faces.
Well, one of the things I believe is that humor is not, like in my case, just when I do psychotherapy, but I try to weave it into the fabric of my life and then promote it with others. So one of my favorite things is in my wallet, I have an Elvis driver's license. And when I go to check in at a hotel and they ask for ID, like the State University ID here, I give them an Elvis driver's license. And in the interaction, they smile, we have a good laugh, and they feel a little bit of joy. And I do the same thing when I check in at a rental car agency. I give them an Elvis license, and I have one here on my desk, and now I can't find it. I was going to show it to you. Of all the things, I had it ready. Anyway, so that's something that I would do. I carry a clown nose, and when I'm on an airplane near the screaming child, I'll get that child's attention, and I'll pop on the clown nose.
I love that.
And when I do that, I get the attention of the child looks, stops crying, And the rest of the adults on the plane don't bother me for the rest of the trip either. So part of the idea is I always have some props with me, like the clown nose, like the driver's license, so that I can try and be playful and fun with people in their everyday environment. It's like being the Johnny Appleseed of humor. I try and spread humor so that other people have a little bit of joy in their life each day.
So you obviously, you practice what you preach in your everyday life. How do you use humor when you're meeting with a patient or a client? I use humor primarily in three ways in psychotherapy. The most important aspect of psychotherapy for everyone is the building of the alliance. So I'll use humor to build the relationship with the client. I'll use some kind of playful humor with the client, maybe tease the client, maybe share a story or a joke that's relevant to the client's presentation. So I use it in that way to build the relationship. Where I go beyond where most people go in using humor is I use it as a diagnostic tool as well as a treatment tool. I can use humor to test changes in their thinking. If they get a joke, that means they are thinking one way as opposed to if they don't get the humor. And then I can use it as a treatment. In fact, one of the ways that anybody listening could use humor as treatment, a very simple thing, is I'll ask my clients to make a humor visualization. Think of a time that they laughed so hard that they fell down, or so hard that tears rolled down their cheeks, or so hard that tears rolled down their legs. So in taking that vision, what happens is it returns them to that moment when they had this humorous moment, this funny moment, and that reactivates the body into that moment. It immediately relieves the emotional distress and it relieves physiological distress. I could go into the biochemistry, but just take my word for it. We will.
And that's something that if I have a client with an anxiety disorder, that I can teach them that, and they can use it when they feel anxious to lower their anxiety. Now, does the anxiety come back? Sure, it does. But in the moment of having a humor visualization, the emotional distress dissipates and they get at least relief for those moments.
Now, Steve, when was the last time you laughed that hard? What was it that made you laugh?
Oh my goodness. Every day there are things. I can't remember the last time I laughed so hard that I fell down. I'm saying that I can remember, but it would be too long a story to set up. But every day are filled with things. Here's a real quick one, an interesting one. I was leaving home one morning, and my wife said to me, I'm just so apologetic for being so bitchy. And my wife is not bitchy. I mean, I would never have thought that word would apply to her. So I go to work, I come home, and I walk in the door, and she comes down the hall and greets me. I give her a big hug, and I whisper in her ear, "I love you, bitch." And she burst out laughing, and I burst out laughing, and we probably fell to the floor on that one. And if I tell people, let me tell you the time I called my wife a bitch, then it wouldn't be funny. But in the context, and it's in the context of the relationship context, that she knows that my belief is she's nowhere close to being a bitch. I can say that to her. But if there was some truth in there, then it might be perceived as hostile humor. That would be a whole other problematic issue.
And that brings me to my next question as to some of the critical elements of humor. Obviously, context is super important, but there are other variables that people bring up, such as truth, such as pain, and such as distance from that pain. And so I want to ask you, Drew, what have you noticed are some of the critical variables of humor? What makes a joke funny?
Well, I think that there's a lot of different theories even around that. Like if you look at the psychology or the study at least of humor, some people say, it is relief theory, that we laugh when we feel some tension and then we have relief from that tension. Others say, no, it's more of incongruity theory. We laugh when we're surprised by something. And others say, no, it's benign violation. It's when we perceive some type of violation, but we recognize it as benign. So there's a lot of different theories around that. And that might actually be something that Steve can speak to a little bit more. But I would think what is interesting to me is that you don't actually even have to know much about those theories to effectively use humor. And I think Steve gave, certainly some great examples of that. And part of that is understanding that humor is more broad than comedy, right? It's not just the things that cause us to laugh, but maybe it's something that causes us to smile. And sometimes recognizing that the bar doesn't have to be, oh, you have to be as funny as a stand-up comedian like, Dave Chappelle or Ali Wong or someone like that, but rather what we talked about earlier, like, oh, anyone can learn this skill, I think is valuable. And a lot of times it's in those moments. And speaking of the inappropriateness, I know a lot of people have that kind of like, okay, but how can we make sure what we say is appropriate? And there's this kind of, is there too much of a quote unquote politically correct culture? And typically, at least in the work that we've done, mostly in corporate, is we found there's typically 3 reasons why humor is seen as inappropriate. First of all, it might have an inappropriate topic, right? So you can't use humor as an excuse to talk about things that you wouldn't otherwise talk about in the workplace, at least in that particular setting. So it's not like, hey, I have this really funny racist joke, and it's okay because it's a joke. And it's like, no, it's still racist. You probably shouldn't say that. And so the topic could be inappropriate, or it could be an inappropriate target. So you might be poking fun at someone. And so that type of aggressive humor can be seen as inappropriate because they're like, wait, do you have the right to make fun of that person? Are you punching down, what we say in comedy of punching down? If you're making fun of someone who is less fortunate than you, then that typically doesn't work well either. And the last reason is that it might come at an inappropriate time. That I do think that humor can be used in a lot of different contexts, but sometimes we need a little bit of time to pass depending on who we're talking to. And I'm sure that Blake can speak a little bit more to the value that humor can bring almost in those stressful moments. But recognizing those 3 as the reasons for inappropriateness. And the easiest rule that I think is what I consider what you could call the Rogers TV rule or the woke Twitter rule. But basically, would you be comfortable with whatever it is that you said or did in, say, a workplace meeting, showing up on the front page of a newspaper or on the frontline news of a news site or getting blasted all over Twitter? And if the answer is like, I don't know if I'd want my boss to see me make that joke, or I don't want my mom, like all of my comedy is rated M for mom. Like I want my mom to always be happy with all the content that she sees. And if I'm like, I don't know if my mom would like that joke, then it's one that I try not to make because it's probably going to be inappropriate.
But at the same time, doesn't humor let us get away with things that we might not necessarily get away with? Like if you can make someone laugh, might you be able to get away with a little bit more?
Absolutely. And that is, to me at least, a slight difference between the use of comedy for the sake of comedy. That's part of the goal of a stand-up comedian, is that they're pushing the norm a little bit. They're allowing us to think about things that we, hey, is it inappropriate to say that? Oh, but now that you say it, I'm actually thinking. If you're going to think at the broader perspective of using it for your own kind of workplace improvement, that's where my focus is of like, okay, I'm an engineer. How do I use this to be effective with the hardest resource I've ever had to manage, which is other humans? Then I'm going to take I'm going to be a little less kind of provocative in a sense, intentionally, because I want to get these results. I don't want to distract someone and say, wait, that was too inappropriate, and I lose sight of the bigger message or the bigger goal that I'm going after. But I think for our own catharsis, for our own conversation with friends, for if we're on a stand-up comedy club stage, absolutely.
I'd love to hear more about that, but we're just about to head to commercial break. When we come back, we'll hear more about Ron Blake's personal journey. We'll be right back after this.
Each week on Grill This, Smoke That, Steph Legary showcases delicious recipes from across Canada, all done on the grill. Join Steph and his special guests on Grill This, Smoke That, Fridays on Rogers TV.
If you only knew what I'm going through, I just can't smile without you.
I'm Wendell Clark with a word about winning. We all know it takes a team effort in any sport and with any challenge. You can be a part of the winning team that shuts out impaired driving. Whether you're out on the town or just hanging out with friends, drink responsibly. Always have a plan for a safe ride home for yourself, your family, and your friends. You'll be helping to shut out impaired driving.
Visit ArriveAlive.org to find out more. Arrive Alive. Drive sober.
Ottawa's local shops, restaurants, and services are woven into the fabric of our city. We can all help them during these challenging times. Order from them online, purchase gift certificates to use later, order meals for takeout or delivery, send them messages of support on social media. Please do it today. Learn how at ottawa.ca/buylocal.
Hi, welcome back to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour. On tonight's show, we're talking about how to use humor to navigate difficult circumstances. And if there's anyone who knows the answer to that question, it's one of our guests tonight, Ron Blake. Blake, you've had quite the incredible journey, a cross-continental journey, sharing stories of triumph and hope through incredible adversity. You sent us some images of your journey that we'll pull up on the screen here in a minute. Tell us about what sparked it, and more importantly, what helps you keep going? What helps you maintain a good mood on a bad day?
Well, I think the best way to start off is, it sounds terribly sad to say this, but I have to start off with what happened to me. I went through a trauma. I almost lost my life in a rape after 3 men came into my home. But I struggled badly with PTSD for a couple of years. And there was finally a night, it was about 5.5 years ago, I woke up from yet another nightmare. I was done. And I couldn't tell the difference between reality and your nightmares anymore. And at that point, when I woke up that night, I just said, this is it. I'm going to take these pills and it'll be over with, because I was in incredible pain. But for some reason, I looked at the television and it was still on. It would always go off because of the timer. But when I woke up that particular night, this TV was on, and there was this show called The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, and something on there made me laugh. And I remember I just paused that show, and I just thought, like, was this the universe? Is this a higher power that just intervened? And at that moment, I said, I'm going to get on this show someday. I'm going to tell my story. I'm going to talk about what happened to me. I'm not going to isolate myself. And that's what started it all. So every day for 5.5 years, I've gone out, met strangers. I walk up to them and I ask them if they want to sign support for my effort to get on that show. And it took on a life of its own. I mean, like, I think you had mentioned, like, I've done a TEDx talk. There's even been an Emmy-nominated documentary. These group of students followed me around for 3 months to see, but they wanted to share, like, what was happening. And as this journey has continued, again, I've had some incredibly entertaining, funny, humorous moments. And that's what I thought. We need to really start getting that out there and sharing this with the world, because the people that I was meeting were impacting me. They were leaving these stories on these giant boards with me. And I thought, well, this is really incumbent upon me to share this with the world, not just with myself. So when I get opportunities with you, Barbara, to do something like this, this opens it up. It allows people to see what I've been seeing. And I have that choice. I can either focus on all the bad that's happened to me, or I can start focusing on all these good and amazing moments that I'm having now.
It's our pleasure to have you on the show tonight. Share some of those moments along the way. What has stood out for you the most in the last 6 years? What has kept you going?
Oh, well, and really what's kept me going is I always remember that moment. Like when I had that laughter come out of me on that fateful night, a lot of people ask me also, hey, Blake, what was the joke that kept you going? And I have no clue what it is. So when somebody in the audience will raise their hand when I speak at an event, they're like, how do you not know what the joke was? I said, well, you guys are really missing what was the most important part of that night for me. It wasn't the joke. It was literally, I focused on the fact that something good was coming out of me. I was laughing. And it was just so powerful. The power, again, of just laughter. And it really was emanating from me. So what's kept me going? people think sometimes I've gone mad and think, why would you spend 14,000 hours of your life to get on some show for 5 minutes? Like, what keeps you going? But that truly is the power of laughter right there. And I always remember that moment, and that pushes me forward. Even when I have a really rough day, a challenging day, I've had a lot of challenges on this journey. I've been in a car accident. I was diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury. I've been in, it's not a shock, I live in the desert here in Phoenix, so I've met people in 119-degree heat. I've been in snowstorms in other parts of the country. So you have to have something that pushes you forward. And again, going back to these folks that I've met, the stories they share with me. And at some point, like if you guys want to know, I can share a couple of those before we're done tonight. But there are some really good ones and things that at the time I thought, is this really happening to me? Like, this is like, I feel like, again, like these people are giving me a script for like a comedy special sometimes. And I don't think that they're intending to do it, but I think by human nature, we're going to do some really goofy things in our life. We're going to say some goofy things. And that reminds me too, that I'm not the expert like Steve and Drew are with comedy in that sense, but the way I see comedy, it's in the simplest aspects of our lives. And that's what's been happening in this journey. The people that make me laugh the most, it's these incredibly simple moments. And I feel like even as a writer, I've been writing for years for a variety of publications. And I noticed in this last year, I've gone to these super simple moments, and I've written about those, but they're very comedic moments too. So you don't have to, I don't think you have to have a PhD or or Ivy League school degree to be this great comedian. I think you just need to let go and grab those simple moments and let your creativity flow. And that's really what I've been doing over these last 5 years. It's been helping me a lot.
The universe just keeps on testing you, and yet somehow you've maintained this ability to keep bouncing back and to be resilient in the face of stress. And obviously comedy and humor have a big role to play in that. I want to go back to Drew and ask you, Drew, when was the last time you laughed so hard that you almost fell down? And what keeps up your sense of humor when you're having a bad day? Because I think that's when is the most challenging to crack a joke or to smile. When everything seems to be going wrong, how do you or your clients, the people who attend your workshops, how did they get to that level?
It's a great question. I mean, one of the times that I laughed recently was I like to think that I'm funny, and my wife agrees, I think, some of the time. But the other day I said something to her that was just so funny that she started laughing. And sometimes it's that contagious laughter that she just starts laughing so much that you start laughing. And the thing that I said to her that was so funny was that a potential client reached out, and they'd seen my TEDx talk and enjoyed it. And so they reached out, and we got onto a call, and the person was like, wow, I feel kind of like I'm talking to a celebrity. And, just because they had seen the talk and they enjoyed it. And so I told that to my wife a little bit later, and she just laughed and laughed and laughed at the idea that like someone is perceiving me as a celebrity, I think. But it was just one of those contagious laughters where it's just, she's laughing so much, then you're laughing as a result. And to what Blake mentioned, a lot of times it's those small moments. And so in that TEDx talk, I talk about this idea of the skill of humor, which I define as kind of three things, what I've taken apart and looked at from an engineer's perspective. And it starts first with your sense of humor, which is simply, what do you find funny or what do you find interesting? And that can develop humor for you. So one example exercise that we go through with some of our clients is even something as simple as like, what's the story of your name, right? For example, my name is Andrew Joseph Tarvin, but before I was born, I was supposed to be a Joseph. That's what my parents thought. They're like, they weren't sure if I was going to be a boy or girl. So they're like, Joseph if he's a boy, Josephine if he's a girl. Super original. They wanted a name that worked for both. I get born though, and they take one look at 0-minute-old me and decided that I didn't look like a Joseph. And I don't know how you know that when you're looking at a 0-minute-old
What does a Joseph look like?
Exactly. Yeah. What does it look like? Who can say? And so they picked up a baby naming book in the hospital and clearly didn't get very far because they named me Andrew. right? So they're like, Aaron, no, 2 days, I don't like that. Adam, nope, we've got one of those at home because my oldest brother is named Adam. Andrew, perfect, let's go with it, right? And so that's the story of my name. So even something like our name can be fodder for comedic material. And that's a great question to ask new people that you've just met of like, oh, hey, Barbara Balfour, that's an interesting name. What's the story of that name? And by sharing it, one, you have an opportunity to share a little bit of humor, or at least insight into your life. And two, it's going to help me remember that name even more because I understand the story behind it. So is there a story to Barbara Balfour?
Not really, no. No, I can't think of one, but maybe if I dug deeper and I sort of mined my past for some comedic moments, and would that be one of the steps in your exercises, maybe talking to family and kind of mining your background for possible comedic opportunities?
Absolutely. So there's 3 tools that we kind of pick up on, one for each stage, right? And so as I mentioned, the first stage is that sense of humor. And so it starts for us with a humor notebook. So this is my humor notebook with a message to remind myself that I like every day, you are responsible for your own happiness. But what a humor notebook is simply it's a repository. It can be a physical notebook like this. It can be, the Notes app on your phone. It can be a napkin right next to you. And anytime you have something that makes you curious, like, why is it like that? Or anytime you say something that makes other people laugh, or anytime something ridiculous happens to you on the way to the supermarket, or whatever it is, it goes down in the humor notebook. And that does a couple of things for you. One, when you want to bring in humor to something, say you're going to go into a meeting at work and you're like, I want to recall something, you can go back to the humor notebook and see, right? It helps you to remember things. But the other thing is, for me, it also helps to activate selective attention. So just to geek out for a brief moment, there's an area part of the brain called the reticular activating system. And one of its roles is selective attention, right? We as humans are constantly bombarded by information, and we can't process all of that information. Selective attention is basically to say, what's important that we elevate to the conscious level? What do we deal with subconsciously? And what do we ignore completely? Well, selective attention is partly defined by priming, what you give it as input. It's kind of like, if you purchase a certain type of car, maybe this has happened to you, Barbara, where you purchase a car or a friend of yours gets a certain type of car and you start to notice that car everywhere on the road.
Yes.
Well, it's not necessarily that there are more of those cars on the road, right? That's happened. It's just that you are now primed to actually pull that out of all the information that you're processing. Well, keeping a humor notebook does the same thing for you. You start to just notice how many opportunities there are for humor in the world around you, and you can start to see things in a slightly different light. And this speaks to a little bit to what Blake was talking about, but there's this kind of comedy adage that says that comedy equals tragedy plus time, right? Something tragic might happen to us, and with enough time passing, we can see the comedy in it. That's why I can look back at pictures of me where I had blonde frosted tips and a stud earring and Harry Potter glasses. And I can laugh about that now because it's clearly ridiculous, but when it first happened, it was a little too serious. But what's interesting is that to me, there's also a little bit of a corollary to this, is that with something tragic, if you can find the comedy in it, it almost makes it feel like more time has elapsed. What you said at the very beginning of this program is that it helps us to smile in the absurdity of what's going on, and that it doesn't control us. It can say, in the spite of this adversity, I'm gonna laugh and say, this is something that I can control, which is my emotion towards it. And that allows us to process it. And that's something like a humor notebook can help you do.
I'm loving all these tips for finding the humor in every day. Thank you so much, Drew. We'll be right back with more of this after the break. Don't go away.
Jean-Marie! Fire! The neighbor's farm is on fire. It's almost to the road. It's heading for us.
Help me get the animals out of the barn.
The fire's getting closer.
I'm on the horse.
The house is burning.
Get out to the river. Get up.
We can't leave everything. Careful. Don't fall.
Come on. We have to hurry.
Hurry. There's the river. We're going to make it. I can't swim.
Yes, you can.
Hurry. Hurry.
You must get in.
I can't.
Watch out for Spark.
His hair's on fire.
Keep their hair wet.
In May 1870, fires raged along the Saguenay River for more than 150 kilometers, destroying land and lives. One family survived by dousing themselves all night against the searing heat. One family, among the thousands whose resourcefulness and courage shaped the character of this land.
It was our 35th anniversary. To celebrate, we were on our way to Mama Rosie's, where we had our first date. That's when we heard coming from the radio. So we stopped and listened. It helped us get to safety. So when I think of our anniversary, because now we have even more to celebrate.
Join us as we look back at previous investiture ceremonies honoring great Canadians. Watch the Order of Canada exclusively on Rogers TV.
Hi, I'm Harriet Clooney. Come check out my show, Scrap Cooking, where I'm going to show you how to use the bits and bobs, the ends, pieces of things that you might otherwise throw in the compost. I'm going to show you how to turn them into something delicious.
Hi, I'm your host, Barbara Balfour. Welcome back to Ottawa Experts. We are talking about how to find humor in the most difficult of circumstances. Now, Drew, before we went to break, you provided our audience with some wonderful tips on how to find the humor in the everyday. Now, I also wanted to bring up that you're the author of a fantastic book, and we'll just bring up the jacket cover there. Where can we find this book?
Like retailers where they share things like Amazon and Barnes & Noble, etc. The thing that I'd love to point out about that particular cover is the quotation comes from a wonderful HR manager who also happens to be my mom.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And I also wanted to mention that you've got some really great free resources on your site, including 101 proven ways to increase morale, productivity, and group cohesiveness. And you also sent us a graphic that we just have on the screen now about the 6 types of humor. Talk to us about that. Appreciator, creator, ambassador, curator, performer, and engineer. I guess that's you.
Yeah, absolutely. That is me in the last one. And this is just one way to think about humor, right? There's absolutely a bunch of different ways. And, Steve spoke to some earlier about his focus of mirth and wit and all of that. And this is just the way that I've kind of seen things. And because the work that we've done with more than 50,000 people all around the world is to recognize that the question isn't, are you funny? The question is, what kind of funny are you? Because we do believe that anyone can kind of learn this skill. And so some people are more appreciators. Those are people who laugh at a bunch of different things. They see the humor in everyday life. Who's great to have in an audience because they're kind of laughing even at your bad jokes. But they're just someone who is outwardly seeking humor and appreciate it, but maybe they're not someone who actively deploys it themselves. Or you might have someone who's like a curator. Curators are those people who are great at finding humorous things, and they're the ones that are always sending them in the group chat or sending you those emails that are like, here's this really funny video that I saw, or here's this meme. And they recognize that to spread humor, you don't always have to be the creator of that humor, but you can be the curator of it. Then you have creator and so these are people who have a strong ability to humor. Creators tend to be people who like sit down and write, so they're the authors of the group, or maybe the poets, or even the cartoonists. Like they're going to create something that then lasts without them performing it. And then performers are those people who, kind of like my uncle David is one of the funniest people I've ever met. He's never taken a comedy class, but he's just one of those people that could tell a story about, stubbing his toe, and it'll be one of the funniest stories that you've ever heard just because of how he delivers it. You have a humor ambassador. Those are people who use humor really effectively to build relationships with people. They're the ones that you kind of go to when you just need a good laugh and you need some support. Or you then have the engineers like me who are very specific of like, okay, I'm going to use humor to achieve this specific result, to achieve this specific thing. And like I said, those are all things that anyone can learn. They can learn any one of those components, and they can use it kind of effectively in their workplace. And the one key to kind of learning all of that, and this is the other kind of tool, right? So we've talked about the humor notebook as a tool. Another tool is what we would call stage time. So if you talk to almost any stand-up comedian, any improviser, any sketch artist, and they'll say nothing improves your skill of using humor like stage time. And so that could be taking an open mic, other free resources. So we have a free open mic that takes place every Saturday. That's virtual, that anyone can join from around the world. So
and how do you join that? Can we just go on your website to learn more about that?
Absolutely. Just go to humorthatworks.com and we've got an events tab right up there. And so you can learn about it. You can click on it so you can join us there. We do some improv workshops through Simon Sinek's classroom. So you can join us for an improv workshop, right? There's all these different ways to join. The other thing, though, that I'd mention is that, as Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage. So you don't have to wait for those moments to practice humor. You can post things like my Twitter feed is mostly puns that I came up with just to test it out to see if people like them and what people react to. Or you can text things in the, hey, I'm working on this story for a meeting I have a little bit later. What do you think of it? Or you can, just use it with your pet, whatever it is, just finding those opportunities to practice that skill, because humor is like any skill, you get better at it with practice and repetition.
And certainly during these COVID times, we all have a little bit more free time to engage in mastering a new skill. So that's really helpful information to know. Thank you so much. Now, we only have a few minutes left before the end of our time together, unfortunately. So I wanted to go back to you, Stephen, and ask you if you have any last parting thoughts to share with our audience as a therapist, the experience that you've had, the tips that you to our viewers tonight.
Okay, well, I would echo what Drew just was talking about, the different styles, and to ask yourself what style of humor fits for you, and then pursue that style. If it's one where you're an appreciator and receiving, then look for humor coming to you. If you're a creator, look to create humor. In my humor history, I would like Drew. I was not a funny guy in high school. Nobody even thought I was funny. But today, as I mentioned with props, think about if there's a prop that you might use. Earlier, I talked about my Elvis license. I want to share that with you now. There's my Elvis license. And when I travel with my wife, she uses her license. And this is my wife.
That's fantastic.
I don't know if it's a little glary,
Marilyn
but
Monroe.
her name's Marilyn Monroe. So simple things that you can do to add humor into your life. If you're an appreciator, maybe it's watching comedy, watching your favorite sitcoms, having a humor buddy or buddies, trading humor. One of the greatest things that people can do to really connect to humor is to share it with someone else. So have somebody that every day you share something funny, not necessarily a joke. It could be a cartoon that you saw. It could be a joke. It could be a funny event that happened. And then each of you share that. It improves the bond. It makes you uplifted. So that's what I would look to. Anything you can do to increase your comic vision. Look to the humor around you. Look for what's funny around you. I'm always seeing things differently than other people. Of course, as Drew talked about, I've practiced. I was not funny. Years and years and years of practice to get it. But now I see things differently in the world, and I do have what I would consider a comic vision. I see funny where others don't. And that brings a little smile to my face. So that's what I would recommend. Looking for whoever you are as a humor individual, what tickles your funny bone, and then seek the things that tickle your funny bone. Don't try to be funny in ways that you're not funny, unless you want to expand in those areas. But certainly in the beginning, find ways to be funny that enhance the funny that you are. Add to that.
And I think being able to see things differently is one of comedy's greatest gifts. I've heard a quote that humor is not happiness, it's more about self-awareness and the ability to see the discrepancy between expectations and reality.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to Blake in our last few minutes of the show. Tell us a little bit about some of the comedic or funny highlights of your journey, some of the stories that you've heard or encountered along the way that kept you going, and some of the things that still kept that smile on your face going even through the hardest times.
Yeah, and there was one that stood out. I went to a coffee shop. It's happened a couple of times at a couple of different places, but in this particular case, it was in a coffee shop in Southern California. I had my boards with me. I was meeting strangers. And on the top of every board, it says Blake Late Show. Really simple message. My name is Blake. I'm trying to get on the Late Show. And it opens up like, why am I trying to get on this show? But as I was explaining to all these people that gathered around me, they thought it was Tony Hawk. And if you guys know, he's like the super famous skateboarder. He's like an amazing guy. And a lot of people said that he's my doppelganger. We actually both lived in Carlsbad, California. He was born there. I used to live there. We're the same age, but there's a big difference. There's a 7-inch height advantage he has on me. But yet, after all these guys signed the boards, they looked at me and said, "Could you give us your autograph?" And I said, "You do know I'm not Tony Hawk. You guys just heard me say that I'm Blake and this is the journey I'm on." But they insisted I was Tony Hawk. And there were some of the baristas came over and told them, they said, "Guys, this isn't Tony Hawk." And they showed him a picture and showed him how tall Tony is. So for me, it's just like you get these moments and I'm like, and they all just watched me leave this coffee shop, and they really, like, they still didn't believe it. So, it's just, it's moments like that. Such a simple moment to tell somebody, but it's just these heartwarming, sometimes funny moments, and that's what gets you through it. And it, like, just even to share it with you guys. And then there was one case where I got I shouldn't just set it up this way, but I got a letter from Pope Francis last summer. He mailed a letter to me thanking me for the work I'm doing. And that letter almost got thrown away as junk mail when I went to go check my mail one day. And I went to go throw it away, and I pulled it back and looked, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is from Pope Francis. So that could have been, like, how often you get something from the Pope? But it almost got discarded immediately. So these are just again, super simple moments, but it gave me something to laugh about. And I was like, what was I thinking at that moment?
How amazing
that
you
a
can
lot
keep
of little
laughing.
Moments like that.
It's amazing that you can keep laughing.
Yeah, and again, I would just keep encouraging people, find those simple moments. I forget if it was Drew or Steve that said, the whole world's a stage. It is, and there are a lot of people that are performing for all of us, and they're making us laugh. If we just stop and look at some of this, it's the world is a very comedic place.
How have you been able to stay authentic and true to yourself along the way? Because I know we all have these little voices in the back of our heads that say, don't make that joke, don't say that. You're afraid that people aren't going to find you funny, or people are going to judge you. It's that fear of rejection. How have you been able to push past those fears that everyone has, I guess?
For me, I know, like, as a writer, I've written my stories, especially this last year, I have to work on being funny. Like, I'm not Robin Williams. That guy was just absolutely amazing. I don't know if there's ever going to be another Robin Williams. But as I write, I actually make myself laugh. You said earlier, you asked the guys, like, when was the last time you laughed so hard that you were crying? And it was actually, I made myself laugh. I was writing this story for my editors and readers, and I started laughing. I was like, they're going to love this, because if I'm sitting here laughing as I'm writing it. So I think just to keep yourself authentic, sometimes just getting these stories out of me and sharing with other people, because that is my authentic voice. It's something that's inside me. I just need to get it out, and I need to share it with people. And just, I think, give yourself permission to share these stories, because even if you're not the most creative person, even if you're not the funniest person on the face of the earth, you still can have that ability to be funny. You still have that ability to be creative. Give yourself the opportunity to do it. Don't be so harsh on yourself. Let it come out. Let it flow. I think that's the best advice I can give people.
Thank you so much.
It's going to keep you around a lot longer.
Thank you so much, Ron Blake. You are truly an inspiration. And Steve Colbert, if you're watching this, you have to book this man on the show. I want to thank all three of you for sharing your wisdom and advice and key strategies on how we can all become funnier in our everyday lives. If you're joining us tonight, thank you so much for watching. Have a great night, and we'll see you again in the studio next week.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Encore Ottawa, a series of pre-recorded concerts featuring 20 of Ottawa's amazing musicians, all recent recipients of the Ottawa Music Development Fund. We are so happy to bring together all this talent onto this beautiful stage, the Shankman Arts Centre, in presenting this concert series for you. We couldn't do this without the City of Ottawa, the Shankman Arts Centre, Rogers TV, and Apartment 613, and the Ottawa Music Industry Coalition.
October 5th, 2014, my daughter was hit by a train. She was walking